She inherited the apartment from her parents. But her mother-in-law declared, "My son and I have decided you don't live here anymore." Victoria was stunned when husband Jack and mother-in-law Margaret dared to kick her out of her own home. From Margaret gradually invading her space, using Victoria's personal belongings like her own property, to Jack being too weak to defend his wife against his mother. But the most shocking blow came when they demanded Victoria voluntarily move out so mother and son could be comfortable. Would Victoria silently submit? Or deliver a revenge that would leave them absolutely devastated? And what happened when Jack tried to open the door but couldn't? The truth about this brutal payback will make you gasp in absolute amazement. And before we continue, write in the comments from which country you're watching the video, and also check if you're subscribed to the channel, as I share interesting life stories with you every day. Okay, let's enjoy the story. "Victoria, don't be mad, but my little boy and I have decided that you don't live here anymore," said the mother-in-law, forgetting that the apartment had been inherited by Victoria from her parents. But the very next morning, they couldn't believe their eyes. Victoria loved her apartment. No, that's not quite right. She adored it. Every little crack in the parquet floor, every sunbeam gliding across the walls in the morning reminded her of her parents. They had left her not just square footage, but an island of warmth and security in the stormy ocean of life. The apartment was officially in her name. All the documents were neatly filed in a folder in her desk drawer. Irrefutable proof of her ownership. After her wedding to Jack, this apartment became their shared home. Victoria happily shared the space with her beloved husband, furnishing it, filling it with coziness. Jack was a good husband, caring and attentive. At least, that's how it seemed to Victoria in the early years of their marriage. Jack suggested moving his mother, Margaret, in after she underwent a complicated surgery. "It's hard for her alone, Vicky. Let her stay with us for a bit. It'll put my mind at ease," he said then, looking at her with his kind, pleading eyes. Victoria couldn't refuse. How could she deny help to someone in need, especially her husband's mother? Margaret's arrival was presented as temporary, just for a couple of weeks until she got stronger, the mother-in-law assured, smiling shyly. Victoria genuinely wanted to help. She cleared out the guest room for Margaret, helped her unpack, and tried to create the most comfortable conditions possible. The first days passed peacefully. Margaret seemed grateful and quiet. She rested a lot, read books, watched television. Victoria worked from home, trying not to make noise or disturb her mother-in-law. Jack, as always, was attentive and caring, trying to please both women. But gradually, almost imperceptibly, the atmosphere in the apartment began to change. At first, it was minor remarks. "Vicky, why do you make this salad with mayonnaise? That's not how we do it in our family." Or, "Jack, why are you walking around the house in those old sweatpants? You can't let yourself go like that." Victoria tried not to pay attention, chalking it up to age and poor health on her mother-in-law's part. Then came the rearrangements. Margaret, wanting to make things better, moved vases, pictures, even reorganized things in the closet. "This'll be more convenient, Vicky. Trust me, I know." Victoria silently watched as her apartment, her personal space, gradually changed, adapting to her mother-in-law's tastes and habits. Margaret started cooking in the kitchen more and more often, pushing Victoria to the sidelines. "I'll make Jack his favorite borscht. You don't know how to make it like I do." Victoria yielded, stepping aside, feeling her role in her own home diminish with each passing day. Jack stayed silent. He diligently avoided conflicts, pretending nothing was happening. "You know how Mom is," he'd say to Victoria when she tried to share her feelings. "Don't pay attention. It's only temporary." But temporary dragged on, turning into permanent. Margaret sensed her power. She occupied more and more of Victoria's territory, unabashedly voicing her opinion on everything. She criticized her clothes, her job, her friends. "Why do you need those girlfriends? They just distract you from the family." Victoria stayed quiet, trying not to argue. She watched as her mother-in-law gradually ensnared her life with tentacles, stripping away her freedom and independence. Victoria felt increasingly alone in her own home. Jack seemed to stop noticing her, fully under his mother's influence. He stopped consulting her, stopped caring about her opinion. He just made decisions aligned with Margaret. One day, Victoria tried to talk to Jack. Jack, I think your mom is taking too much upon herself. This is my apartment, but she acts like she's the owner here. Jack frowned. Victoria, don't start. Mom's having a hard time right now. We need to support her. It's not forever. But Jack, she's been here for months, and she's not planning to leave, Victoria exclaimed, feeling anger boiling inside her. Don't exaggerate. Mom's just gotten used to us. She likes it here. Jack hugged Victoria and tried to kiss her. Everything will be fine, Vicky. Don't worry. But Victoria couldn't help worrying. She saw her life crumbling under her mother-in-law's onslaught and her husband's indifference. She felt them stripping away her freedom, her independence, her very self. She stayed silent. But inside her, a decision was forming. Silence isn't always a sign of weakness. Sometimes it's just a way to give the other person enough rope to hang themselves. Victoria decided to give Margaret and Jack enough rope. She wanted to see how far they'd go in their audacity and selfishness. She wanted to understand how much or how little they valued her. Victoria knew Jack was weak and susceptible to his mother's influence. She loved him, but she could no longer tolerate his weakness and indifference. She hoped he'd come to his senses and take her side. But she was also prepared for him to stay on his mother's side. Victoria knew Margaret was an experienced manipulator and schemer. She knew how to weave webs of lies and deceit, play on people's emotions, achieve her goals at any cost. Victoria had to be cautious and foresighted to avoid falling into her trap. Margaret, like a relentless tidal wave, continued to seize the apartment's space. In the bathroom, Margaret shamelessly used Victoria's shampoos and shower gels, leaving behind piles of empty bottles. Victoria noticed her favorite face cream, brought from France, was suspiciously running out fast. "Oh, Vicky, sorry," the mother-in-law apologized, not looking the least bit guilty. "Your cream moisturizes the skin so well. My skin's been so dry after the surgery." Victoria just nodded, understanding it was just an excuse. Even in the bedroom, Victoria felt like a guest. Margaret constantly popped in for a minute for medicine, a book, or just to chat. Often, these minutes stretched into hours. She'd sit on the edge of the bed and start talking about her problems, illnesses, neighbors. Victoria felt her personal space inexorably shrinking. Jack, coming home from work, would find them both in the bedroom, his mother animatedly telling stories, Victoria listening silently. He'd just smile guiltily and leave, preferring to spend time in another room. Working from home, which Victoria had loved so much, turned into torture. Margaret constantly distracted her, asking silly questions, requesting help with the computer, though she knew how to use it perfectly, complaining about boredom. "Vicky, why are you always sitting at that computer?" she'd grumble. "You'd be better off paying attention to your husband. He needs communication too." Victoria tried to ignore it, hoping her mother-in-law would eventually leave her alone. But Margaret didn't give up. One day, she declared outright, "I don't understand why you work from home at all. You'd be better off finding a normal job instead of sitting here like a hen all day. Jack's the one working, pulling the whole family." Victoria felt anger boiling in her chest. She wanted to retort that her job brought good income, that she loved what she did. But instead, she just silently lowered her eyes. Jack, hearing his mother's words, just blushed and muttered something incoherent. He no longer defended her. He seemed afraid to contradict his mother, afraid to disturb her peace. Victoria noticed how Jack had changed. He became more withdrawn, irritable. He avoided conversations with her, preferring to spend time with his mother. He stopped asking her opinion, stopped showing interest in her life. It was as if he'd forgotten she was his wife, his beloved woman. He'd turned into a shadow of his own mother. "You know how Mom is," he'd often say, justifying her behavior. Those words hurt Victoria more than all of Margaret's reproaches. She felt a wall growing between her and Jack, one she couldn't break down. Margaret acted as if she'd forgotten the apartment belonged to Victoria. She handled things like her own, made decisions without her knowledge, invited guests without asking permission. It was as if she considered it her home now, her territory. One day, Victoria saw her mother-in-law rearranging framed photos on the shelf. In place of the photo with her parents, Margaret put her own photo with Jack from many years ago. Victoria silently took the photo and put it back in place. Margaret looked at her challengingly, but said nothing. On Friday evening, When Victoria was already anticipating quiet weekends, even if alone, Margaret, as if sensing her mood, decided to deliver the decisive blow. Jack returned from work later than usual. Victoria was just finishing an article, shutting out the world with headphones. When she took them off to have dinner, Margaret was already at the table, ladling out hearty borscht, cooked of course by the proper recipe. Jack looked rumpled, avoiding her gaze. "Vicky, sit down, dear," Margaret cooed, adjusting the napkin under the plate with maternal care. "We need to talk to you." Victoria grew vare. Such talks usually ended with another list of her shortcomings as a wife and homemaker. She sat down, trying to stay calm. Jack stayed silent, poking at his plate with a fork. Margaret cleared her throat, sighed theatrically, and began. "You know, Vicky, Jack and I discussed this." Victoria mentally noted it. Jack and I. Since her mother-in-law moved in, she heard "we" more and more often. We decided. We thought. We believe. Her opinion, obviously, no longer counted. "And we came to the conclusion that it's probably not very comfortable for you here," she finished, looking at Victoria with feigned concern in her eyes. Victoria raised her eyebrows in surprise. "Not comfortable? Why's that?" Margaret pretended to be surprised by the question. "Well, how do I put it? You're such a creative soul. You need space, inspiration. And here Jack and I are, with our worries, our routine, probably getting in your way." Victoria stayed silent, trying to figure out where her mother-in-law was going. She sensed a trap, falseness in every word. Jack finally lifted his eyes. He looked guilty and embarrassed. "Mom, maybe we shouldn't be so abrupt?" "No, Jackie," Margaret cut him off. "We need to be direct. Vicky's a smart girl. She'll understand." She turned back to Victoria, smiling radiantly. "In short, Vicky, my boy and I decided it'd be better for you to live separately, at least for a while, so you can rest, recharge your inspiration, and we'll manage here somehow on our own." Victoria stared at them like actors in a bad play. She felt a wave of anger rising inside, but she held it back. She knew she couldn't show her emotions now. She needed to hear them out to grasp the full scale of their betrayal. "Separately?" Victoria asked calmly. "How so?" "Well, how do I say this?" Margaret hesitated but quickly composed herself. "Maybe you should rent an apartment or stay with a friend? Anyway, however you decide. The main thing is that you're okay." Jack muttered something incoherent, staring at his plate. "This way. It'll be easier for everyone." Victoria shifted her gaze from Margaret to Jack. She saw fear and remorse in his eyes, but not a drop of sympathy for her. He'd betrayed her, chosen his mother over his wife, comfort over love. In that moment, Victoria made her decision. She calmly set down her spoon. "As you say," she said in an even voice, looking straight into Margaret's eyes. The mother-in-law smiled victoriously. She thought she'd broken Victoria, achieved her goal. She had no idea Victoria had already started her own plan. The next day, Saturday, Margaret and Jack, as usual, headed to the cottage. They always spent weekends there, digging in the garden and grilling barbecue. Victoria usually refused to go, citing work. She didn't like the cottage, didn't like digging in the dirt. She much preferred spending weekends at home with a favorite book or movie. "You're not coming with us?" Margaret asked, pretending to be upset. "It's so nice there, fresh air." "No thanks," Victoria replied. "I have a lot of work." She saw them to the door, smiling sweetly. When the door closed behind them, she exhaled and got to work. First, she called a locksmith to change the locks, explained the situation, and he, nodding sympathetically, quickly replaced all the locks in the apartment. Now the old keys were useless. Then she called her lawyer, Laura. Laura was an old acquaintance who'd helped her handle the inheritance after her parents' death. Victoria told her about the situation, about her mother-in-law's audacity and her husband's betrayal. "Don't worry, Victoria," Laura reassured her. "We'll sort it all out. The apartment's yours, and no one has the right to kick you out. I'll prepare an official notice terminating the right to use the residential premises for Margaret and for Jack too, if he doesn't come to his senses." Victoria felt relief. She knew Laura was a pro and would do everything to protect her rights. While Laura handled the documents, Victoria gathered Margaret's things and packed them into boxes. She didn't stand on ceremony, tossing dresses, sweaters, jars of creams into the boxes like discarding trash. She felt that along with Margaret's things, the resentment, anger, and fear were leaving her life. By evening, everything was ready. Locks changed, documents prepared, mother-in-law's things packed. Victoria sat in her apartment alone, but for the first time in a long while, she felt free. On Sunday evening, Margaret and Jack returned from the cottage, anticipating a home-cooked dinner and familiar comfort. Margaret, as always, carried a bag of apples from the garden, sure that Victoria had already prepared something delicious. Jack followed, lost in thought, tired from the drive, and perhaps a bit guilty toward Victoria for what had happened. They approached the apartment door. Jack took out his key, inserted it into the lock, and turned. No click. He tried again, then once more. Silence. "What's going on?" Margaret asked, frowning. "Did you break the key?" "No," Jack replied. "It just won't open." He rang the doorbell. Silence. Rang again, more insistently. No response. "Maybe Victoria went out?" Margaret suggested. "Where could she go at this hour?" Jack shrugged and tried to open the door with his key again unsuccessfully. "This is all strange," he muttered. Jack rang the doorbell again, now with clear irritation. This time, the neighbor, Aunt Zoe, opened her door, peeking out curiously from behind the slightly ajar door. "Oh, Jack, it's you?" she asked. "I thought maybe someone was messing around again." "Aunt Zoe, hello," Jack replied. "Is Victoria home? We can't get into the apartment." Aunt Zoe hesitated for a moment, as if unsure what to say. Then, after a pause, she said, "Why did you kick Victoria out of her own apartment? It's all hers, you know." "Margaret Paulett." Jack stared at the neighbor in shock. "What are you talking about, Aunt Zoe?" Jack asked. "No one kicked anyone out." "Oh, come on," Aunt Zoe replied, shrugging. "Victoria told me herself. She said you and your mom decided it'd be better for her to live separately, and the poor thing just sighed in silence." "That's not how it was," Margaret exclaimed, trying to maintain a semblance of calm. We just thought she needed more space." Aunt Zoe looked skeptically at Margaret. "Space? In her own apartment?" "Yeah, right." Jack felt a lump rising in his throat. He shifted his gaze from Aunt Zoe to his mother. Margaret avoided his eyes, nervously fidgeting with the hem of her dress. Margaret tried to justify herself. "I just thought we were deciding together that it'd be better for everyone." Victoria's so quiet. It was probably hard for her to say if something bothered her. "You knew, Mom," Jack said, raising his voice. "You knew the apartment was Victoria's? You just pretended to forget. All this time you acted like it was your home too." Margaret burst into tears. Tears seemed to be her last weapon. "Why are you yelling at me like that, Jack?" she sobbed. "I just wanted what was best. I just wanted us all to be together, so you wouldn't be alone." "Alone?" Jack smiled bitterly. "And now, I'm not alone? Now you're not abandoning me?" He turned back to the door and started pounding on it with his fist. "Victoria, open up. Victoria, please, talk to me." The apartment was quiet, only the soft rustle of curtains in the wind. Meanwhile, Victoria was calmly sipping tea by the window. The apartment was warm and cozy. A vase of flowers from a friend stood on the table. She looked out at the street, at the bustling people, the passing cars. She felt free. Her home was her fortress again, forever. She heard the muffled voices behind the door, heard Jack's knocking and shouts, but she didn't move. Her silence now spoke louder than any words. Soon the knocking stopped, the voices faded. Victoria heard the elevator door slam. They were gone. She sighed with relief. Now it was over. Now she was free. That night, Victoria slept soundly and peacefully. The sleep of a woman who had found herself. The sleep of a woman who had found her path. The sleep of a woman who had finally become free. Meanwhile, Jack and Margaret stood on the street, confused and humiliated. Margaret continued to cry and wail, blaming Victoria for all her troubles. Jack stayed silent, lost in thought. He realized he'd made a mistake. He'd betrayed Victoria and let his mother manipulate him. He destroyed his family. Jack looked at his mother with disgust. He no longer saw a loving mother in her, but a selfish and domineering woman who had ruined his life. "This is all you, Mom," Jack said, looking her straight in the eyes. "This is all your fault." Margaret sobbed. "Don't say that, Jack. I just wanted what was best." "You wanted what was best for yourself, Mom," Jack replied. "You never thought about me, about Victoria. You only thought about yourself." He turned away from her and walked off. Margaret tried to stop him, but he paid her no attention. He left, leaving her alone on the street, in tears and despair. Jack didn't know where to go. He couldn't go back to Victoria's apartment, couldn't stay with his mother. He was alone. Jack wandered the streets all night until dawn broke. When the sun rose over the horizon, he realized he needed to do something. He needed to find a place to live and start over. He knew he had to atone for his guilt before Victoria. He had to prove to her that he could be better, that he was worthy of her love. All right, thanks for listening.